trafficking has persisted throughout history, often occurring in a time when victims lacked the vocabulary to articulate their suffering. The phrase sex trafficking is always hidden in plain sight. It highlights the unfortunate reality that many survivors go unnoticed. We can only identify and address this issue by fostering education and awareness within the community. Rhonda Kuykendall, a resident of Fulshire, became a victim at the age of 10 and is now actively combating human trafficking in Fort Bend County and across Texas. Rhonda, herself a survivor of sex trafficking, strives to help communities comprehend the dynamics of sex trafficking and recognize its signs within schools, families, and even neighborhoods. As a dedicated social justice advocate, Rhonda has actively participated in the Texas legislature, contributing to the passage of 9 legislative bills aimed at supporting survivors of sexual assault and sex trafficking. Currently associated with Fort Bend County DA's office, she collaborates with many other nonprofits for an overarching goal to ensure the safety of our communities and eliminate human trafficking. We sat down with Rhonda to talk about her community outreach initiatives in Fort Bend County. And today in our studio, we have Rhonda with us. She has worked extensively on human trafficking. She's part of Fort Bend County DA's office human trafficking team, and I think her work is just simply amazing. Thank you, Rhonda, for joining me today in my show.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here today.
I'm very excited to meet you as well. Rhonda, my first question would be, how did all started with the DA's office? Because Fort Bend County is considered a very safe place for a lot of communities living here. But tell us how this journey started.
Well, the work that I'm doing right now with the DA's human trafficking team, it came because my perpetrator was being released from prison. And I was told by TDCJ that I needed to go around all of the local law enforcement agencies and let them know, show them his mugshot to be aware that he's been out. And so when I went to the DA's office to tell them about it, I met with the second in command at the DA's office, and he's like, you know what? I have the best job for you. You would fit in perfectly here. And he invited me to come into this space and work on the DA's human trafficking team. Previous to Brian Middleton being elected as a Fort Bend County District Attorney, there was an idea being spread around Fort Bend County that human trafficking didn't exist. I knew firsthand that it did exist because I was trafficked out of Fort Bend County in 1981. And I was trafficked in a time when we didn't have the language to even describe what was happening to us. That language was not implemented in the United States until the year 2000 and not in Texas until 2003.
That is just, okay. Tell us what exactly happened, because you said that the guy who was involved, he was released, and that must be a very scary point for a victim. So what exactly happened? I mean, if you're not comfortable, we don't have to talk about it, but if you want to tell our viewers exactly.
Absolutely, no problem at all. At a very, very young age, I grew up in a family where I grew up in terror. I was exposed to domestic violence between my 2 parents. And when my father would beat up my mom, he would grab me and I would be on the run with him. So I would be away from my mother and my 2 sisters for a week, a month, one time a year when it happened. And so it was during this time when I was away living with my dad, the first time I was ever raped. I was 8 years old and it was 3 boys behind a fence. That set me up for the vulnerabilities that would happen later on. And so 2 years after that, I was living back with my mom and we were visiting my dad in Pasadena. And my parents were up in their apartment and I was down at the pool and a man walked up to me and said, "Do you want to be a model?" I was 10 years old. And so I said, of course, what 10-year-old wouldn't want to be a model? It's glamorous. And so what ended up happening was eventually I was taken from Fort Bend County, driven into Houston on multiple visits to visit him. And then I was flown. I was taken to Houston Intercontinental Airport and I was flown out to Lubbock. And so I remained quiet for many, 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 many years. And at some point in my life, I thought, I'm strong enough. I need to do something about it. When I came out, I found out that I was past a statute of limitations. That means that a victim has only a certain amount of time to have a crime, to report a crime against them, and then have it charged. So because I was past that SOL, I couldn't do anything about it. And so what I decided to do was to go to Austin and change the law. I literally bought a Lobbying 101 book and marched myself to Austin. It took me 5 years, over 2 legislative sessions, and we abolished the statute of limitations for child sexual assault back in 2007. During this time when I was working on this, I found out that my perpetrator was in prison at that time. He had been convicted 4 times, 3 different states. He'd been convicted twice in Texas.
So he was doing it regularly.
He has spent his lifetime pretty much in different prisons across the state. He's been in prison in Texas twice, Kansas, and California. And so when I found him, I was told that he was going to be mandatorily released pretty soon. And he was. He was released in 2006. And it took him about 3 weeks before he sent me a threatening email. And I have the email. I will send it to you for you to review it yourself. It is literally reading into the mind of a predator, because at some points it's a 3-page typed email. And in some points of this email, he says, I can't go to sleep knowing what I did to you. And then another point of the email, it says, I never thought about getting caught due to the consensual nature of our contacts. So back then when the abuse happened, he was 24 and I was 10. And so at the end of the email, it's a threat. He says, if you don't stop what you're doing, which was working on legislation, I'm going to cause you serious harm. Because of that verbiage, his parole was revoked. And it had nothing to do with the content of the email. He was not supposed to be using the internet. So it was misuse of the internet while he was in a halfway house. His parole was revoked. He was sent back to prison and he stayed there for 10 more years. But in those 10 years, every single year, I had to fight his parole release. Every year he was eligible for parole. So every year I had to write letters, get my friends to write letters. It was almost like staying in this constant, about 6 months out of every year I was free. The other 6 months I was waiting. I was waiting to find out if he was going to be released. He had already made threatening remarks to me. And so he went back to prison for 10 years and then he was released again. He was released in 2019. That is when I went to the DA's office and I had to report he's being released. And that's how I got involved with the DA's human trafficking team. But what's frustrating, things that we need to work on here in Texas, is this past May, I found out that he violated his parole again. And his parole officer, he's right now in El Paso. That's where he's located. His parole officer said, you know what, if you want, you can travel to El Paso and you can come to the parole revocation hearing. And so I did. I traveled all the way to El Paso. At first, they weren't going to let me in. And then when they found out I wasn't what's called a victim of record, then they allowed me to sit in the hearing. During the hearing, I was the only person in the entire room who wasn't allowed to speak. I was told, if you say a word, we're going to make you leave. And so I think that I've had years of therapy dealing with what's happened to me. And when I got back home from El Paso, my head told me how I should feel, but my body wasn't responding the same way. And so it literally took me like 4 days to kind of regulate myself to be able to get back to the work that I'm doing. And it just goes to prove that for victims of this crime, when the crimes are just so horrific, it's almost as though we're given a life sentence. That my date of freedom will come when he's no longer walking on this earth, because then I'll know that I'm actually safe.
I'm so sorry, Rhonda. I just want to hold your hand because this has been a tough journey for you. I mean, this is just too much to process. You were strong. You stood for, what was right and what is wrong. But there are so many children in our counties, in our neighborhood, in our areas. They have no idea what exactly is happening to them and how people can violate those situations. They are in broken homes, broken families. They have issues at home and they want to just escape.
You are strong enough to stand. And I am so thankful for Fort Bend County DA's office, like you are there to help them navigate these very complex situations. Because once you are a survivor, you exactly know what can happen next.
Yeah.
And you had the strength to go in all those hearings. And the biggest thing is the fear.
Right. You definitely feel that you've walked that journey and that you have a responsibility for those that came after you. There was a time where I felt extremely guilty for his future victims, for the people that came after me, because I didn't do anything. But I had to remember that I was 10 years old. And it took a long time for me to be able to be in a safe place to be able to go forward and do something about it.
That is so brave of you. That is so brave of you.
Well, thank you.
I mean, like, there are so many women. I am a woman, and I have reported for so many years. I have met so many women. They do not even realize like something is going wrong with them. And if you point it out, they're predators. They just convince them the other way around, and they believe that. Yeah. It's just understanding like something is not right. That's the whole point of figuring it out, that something is not right and something needs to be done. My next question would be, Rhonda, like you have worked on 9 sex trafficking bills. Mm-hmm. So tell us more about it. Like how did the state help you?
So what you learn when you work into legislative advocacy is sometimes you feel like it's 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. And so what I did every legislative session is I just kind of look at what's going on in the anti-trafficking space and what bills need to be filed. And I created my own little legislative agenda and pick which ones that I personally want to work on. Mm-hmm. And so we worked on a child pornography. Part of my story was child pornography. Back then, there wasn't access to the internet. So It was mainly photographs and video.
Yeah.
And so we passed a bill this past legislative session that created a stair-step offense for child pornography. Mm-hmm. Depending upon the number of images that a perpetrator has, that increases the penalty. And so that was one of the bills that I had worked on. We worked on an Uber bill. 2 sessions ago, we worked on human trafficking education in hotels and motels. Mm-hmm. This is so very important because when I was taken and flown from Intercontinental Airport out to Lubbock, I stayed in a hotel. And there were points and times when he would leave me and I was alone at this hotel, a 10-year-old. And so you wonder if the staff and employees and the people that come in and clean the rooms after visits and whatnot, if they noticed that there was a little girl in there alone, would that have been a red flag? Could that have changed my story? Could it have been reported somewhere? So it was so vitally important that this education in hotels and motels, it's mandatory. They have to do it here in the state of Texas. And so that was one very important bill.
So you worked on the red flag bill, basically. Mm-hmm. So that was like if you even suspect, so you can report it, like there is something not right with the child, or you think that there's some activity going on, so probably the local authorities can step in at that point. Mm-hmm. And that can make a situation a little better than what it was before, correct?
Definitely.
All right. Let me just take a very short break, Rhonda. We are going for a very short break. We will be right back, and we're going to talk about in our communities, how can we point out red flags and how we can keep our communities safer and our children safer. Stay tuned.
The Made to Move sales event at Big Star Cadillac is all about the savings. Enjoy 1.9% APR financing on all 2023 and 2024 Cadillac CT4 and CT5 sedans and all 2023 and 2024 XT4, XT5, and XT6 crossovers. Lower your payment with 1.9% APR limited term financing at Houston's Cadillac to your door dealer. Gulf Freeway just 2 minutes south of the Beltway.
Shop smarter when you shop at Big Star. Shop BigStarCadillac.com.
Hey. Okay. Mm-hmm.
If you love me enough to tolerate my perfect little pets and all their glorious dander, then of course you'll visit nhtsa.gov/the-right-seat. to make sure I'm in the right car seat. Hey, Bobo, do trees tell each other stories?
I'm sorry. I'm afraid I don't know that.
Hey, why don't we go find out? Listen.
Do clouds take naps?
I couldn't tell you.
Dad, do stars visit their friends?
Look!
Welcome back. We're in conversation with Rhonda Kuykendall, and she has worked extensively on human trafficking situation, not only in Fort Bend County, let me say this, in our Lone Star State. Thank you, Rhonda, for joining me. Once more, I'm so grateful that you're here. Tell us about the red flags. What are the red flags, and how do you work on your advocacy campaigns?
Sure. First, I wanted to mention something you had talked about before, how a lot of vulnerabilities come from, having kids that have been previously sexually abused, or kids that are growing up in a single parent home, or kids that are in the child welfare system. That is very true. But we also know with the advent of the internet, with the advent of social media, now perpetrators have access to kids without having to physically see them.
Yes.
And so that's what we have to be so careful with as parents as well. And so we have situations as well where you might see that, a majority of kids come from hard places.
Yes.
But we also have situations where kids are raised in a two-parent home in a gated community, and it can happen to them too.
Yes.
If we don't keep our kids safe when it comes to what apps they're using, what social media they're on.
Children normally hide all these things. I mean, that's the most difficult part, because they're in that age and they feel like they're adult already and they don't want to talk to their parents about it. So what would be the way to handle that, you think?
The best way to handle it is by normalizing the conversation from the very beginning. And it's never too late. If you haven't talked to your children about it before, start tomorrow. Here in the Houston area, we have a nonprofit by the name of Street Grace. Mm-hmm. They have a booklet. You can download it for free. It's called Keeping Kids Safe in the Digital Age. It is a wonderful workbook because so many times us as parents, we're just unsure of what to say, right?
Yes.
We don't know how to say it.
Uncomfortable situation.
Exactly. It's like all of this is difficult to talk about. But we know also that there is a huge intersectionality between sextortion and suicide with teen kids. So we have to start talking about these things. This booklet that's available here locally and online, it is a workbook to where it goes over a topic. And then after that, there's like these questions, there's discussion questions so that you and your child
can be engaged.
You can engage in this discussion. And then you move methodically through the books, completing it all the way to the end so that you cover it. Once you finish with this book, you've normalized that conversation. And so you continue to find opportunities to talk with your kids about it. I can't say enough that at every single age, a child can be taught how to keep themselves safe. As parents, we know that we have busy schedules.
Yes.
Our kids are in multiple sports. There's no way for us to be everywhere all times.
Yeah.
So if we can find ways to empower kids to protect themselves, that is the way that we can start helping with that. And when I'm talking about at every age, if you're talking about a very young child, teach them the biological body parts. Do not have cute little names for them. There have been instances where a child was actually telling something that happened to them, abuse that was happening to them, but it wasn't being caught because they were using these cute names. So we have to start with that. But then after that, you can continue to talk to your kids about what a healthy relationship looks like, how love does not hurt, and continue to open up this dialogue. It may not be popular and most parents may not do it, but when the evening comes, the cell phone should be sitting in the kitchen. When you have access to the internet in bedrooms every single evening with children, that increases the vulnerabilities that traffickers have access to them. Have conversations with your kids. If you ever feel uncomfortable, if something doesn't seem right, talk to me about it. If you're ever at a party and your friend leaves you and a complete stranger asks somebody their age, not somebody older.
Yeah.
Somebody their age says, hey, you need a ride? Talk to them about the dangers of that and what they should be doing. There's opportunities where for parents, if their kids maybe don't feel comfortable talking to them, pick trusted adults in your life that could serve in that capacity. Hey, if my child ever calls you, will you be there for them?
Yes.
Let them know that.
Yeah.
Find all these opportunities. Role play, have conversations with your kids. If this happens, how would you feel? What would you do?
Yeah.
Really more than anything else, I can say normalize the conversation. And it may be uncomfortable when you first start, but don't stop.
That was my next question, Rhonda. Like when you are dealing, because you are probably dealing with a lot of victims as well, and you're working on their advocacy as well. And like before the interview recording, we were talking about it. How do you deal with that? Because they are coming from situations and families when probably their parents are not that communicative with them. And they have their own issues to deal with. Sometimes parents have their own issues. Maybe alcoholism is an issue and drugs is an issue. So those children, do they have help?
So here in Texas, the governor's office has what's called the Child Sex Trafficking Team. There are 5 regional advisors that are all across the state of Texas that when a child has been confirmed to be trafficked, they provide wraparound services to them. But to your point, we have to provide wraparound services for the whole family rather than just for the child, because that child will be returning to that family.
Exactly.
And so that we have to do it. We have to do it family by family and need by need.
And you think that has been successful? Because like I said, there are many issues around us, and societies are different after the advent of the social media, and everything is online and everything is on app. And it's just getting difficult to just catch this and that. So you think it would be easy to, it worked? I mean, any success stories?
Yeah, I think the most tuned in parents are the ones that the abuse has already occurred.
Wow.
And that's the tragedy of it, right?
Yes.
Because we have to work in preventative spaces. We have to work in stopping abuse before it happens. So that's part of the strength of the DA's human trafficking team, that when we talk about awareness, we talk to families. We don't just talk to kids. And we're trying to bring awareness to all of the societal issues that affect this. And it isn't one issue. It's several different issues. And so when you're talking about how do you go out and identify somebody that's a victim of trafficking, what you talk about like red flags.
Yeah, like my next question was like basically, it was like, okay, I thought Fort Bend County is very safe. I mean, it was a shocker for me when I started working on this show. And then I started Googling all that. And I was like, hey, I never know that this was happening in Fort Bend County.
Right.
So this is something like, how do you guys identify it, like the red flags wise?
So although we are talking about human trafficking a lot today, much more today than 20 years ago, it has always been here. If you think about Fort Bend County and geographically where it lies, right up against Harris County. Harris County is a huge conglomerate that has a lot of sex trafficking, whether you're talking about in illicit massage businesses. Yeah. We have in Houston the Bissonnet Strip, which they just did the track, which they just did some operations where they've closed that down. That trafficking didn't go away. It's moving to different areas.
Yes, so exactly. That was my thing.
There will be a new track.
There are those women involved, those children are involved, and they are into substance abuse as well, those parents. And then I have even heard stories from real victims, like they are trafficked and they have been used as into prostitution. And once they have no money with them, so they go to, for example, to Walmart and try to shoplift something, they get arrested and they are again bailed out by their pimps.
That's right.
And again, they're back on the track or wherever the new track is.
Right.
So it's a vicious circle. It's never ending circle.
It is.
And I had this thought in my mind, like, what about those children? They are still facing the same thing.
Yeah.
So how do we deal with it as a community?
So the first thing that you have to think about is that when you go to the nail salon, when you go to the post office, when you go to Walmart, there are trafficking victims hidden plain sight around you. And what do you have to notice? If you see a male and a female or two females, two males, We used to always talk about trafficking as being only a female issue, and now we know that it's both male and female. It's just males are less likely to talk about it. Now we're beginning to open up that gap. So if you see two people together and one of them will not give eye contact or looking down at the ground, every question that you ask, if you see something that looks suspicious and you ask a question, they won't answer. Somebody's answering for them. They may look exhausted. They may look bruised. They can't tell you where they live. These are the questions that start to identify that they're trafficking victims. As a community, we should be looking out for that. But I can tell you that with the DA's human trafficking team, we work on awareness. We are not part of the sting operations that go on.
Yeah.
But DA Middleton has made it his mission to combat sex trafficking.
Yes.
And that's exactly what they have done. And so they have an entire team that works collaboratively with the Human Trafficking Rescue Alliance, HATRA in Houston, and all these local municipality police departments. Yeah. They come together in collaboration and they work on sting operations. They may set up in a hotel and throw out some sexual advertisements and see who comes. And so that's what they have been doing over the last, I think it's been 3 years since he's been the DA.
I mean, that is just simply great. That's just, so basically these are more like a community outreach initiatives, and they have been they have been successful. So what is the successful rate looks like?
Well, I mean, a successful rate is when you actually recover victims because we know that they're going to get services. And so in the state of Texas, we also implemented a new law 2 legislative sessions ago that made sex buying a state jail felony. First offense, first time buying sex, it's a state jail felony. When you were talking about also when you'll have a victim that goes to Walmart, steals something because they're hungry, they have no money, they get thrown in jail. We're also working on, the Lone Star Justice Alliance is working on what's called an affirmative defense for duress. That means when a victim is charged with theft, they can use their background of being a victim of trafficking to explain why they committed that crime. A lot of times victims are forced to commit crimes by their traffickers.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. And so we want to have a way in Texas to say this is why it happened, to bring that into a trial, to helpfully mitigate and prevent victims from being charged and convicted of crimes that they were under duress whenever they committed them.
My last question, Rhonda, you have been a victim and now you're doing the advocacy work with the victims. What difference do you feel? Like, there was a time, so any laws have changed and they have changed for the better? Because when you told me in the initial interview, you said like you had 6 months free and 6 months with fear. So do you feel some new laws have been placed which makes it a little better for victims?
Definitely they have. You know, you're just always kind of trying to move that legislation forward. And then at the same time, they haven't. I'm waiting to find out if my perpetrator is going to be released again. When he's released again, will he be up for parole? I mean, if he goes back in, will he be up for parole every single year again? Or is he going to be released again? So you still have that thought process in the back of your mind. But I can tell you that I never really thought I would know when my law, the law that I passed in 2007, would take effect. Because at that time, it abolished the statute of limitations, and that statute of limitations was 10 years from your 18th birthday. So 28 years later is when my law would come into effect, when a victim would be able to press charges that couldn't before.
Yeah.
This past July, I was sitting in my living room and I got a Facebook message. And it said in the Facebook message, "You don't know me, but I know you. And I've always followed the work that you do. And because you abolished the statute of limitations, I had my day in court."
Wow.
Yeah. That was her. That was the person. It took 28 years. I never thought I would know who she is. But if you wonder why survivors, why people with lived experience work on changing laws, she's why.
That is awesome. Thank you so much, Rhonda, for joining me today. I don't think so I can end this conversation, but one show cannot do just justice with this conversation because this is such an important discussion for our communities, for our people, and many people who are just suffering quietly. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
By having this discussion with Rhonda, there's only one thing which comes to my mind. Just don't stay quiet. if you're not comfortable with something, there is always help available. You can always go online and look for that help. You can have friends whom you can talk to. Probably they can help you out of a situation, because sometimes we lose the capability of figuring things out on our own, but a friend can always help. Thank you for watching with me, Sofia Jamal. Truth be told, have a great weekend.